PaperX just choked another grand final, and Leviatan were lucky to win because they are meta merchants abusing Neon and Phoenix. There is no macro, there is no strategy left in Valorant. It's just micro. Go shoot the other team. What are we even doing calling this a tactical shooter? And the new map looks awful and just completely cut and paste and boring. Also, by the way, have you heard Valorant is dying as an esport because we're getting absolutely mogged by Counter-Strike in terms of viewership? At least these are all the things that I've been reading online, and I have some thoughts to say about them. So welcome to CompCheck episode 11, brought to you by Sony INZONE, who I will talk about in just a little bit as the sponsor of this episode. I want to start with the grand finals of Masters London because it just happened. It's very fresh in my mind, and to me, it was one of the better finals that we've had at a tournament in quite some time. The storylines at Masters London were maybe a little bit lacking at times because we didn't have some of the big names like the Fanatics and the Sentinels, but I think there was a huge amount of intrigue and some really cool stuff going on at this event, so I want to focus on the positive first. PaperX came in to this tournament as a huge favorite. I think at some points they were, like a 70% favorite to win the event. But going into the grand finals, there were a couple of things that they had to overcome. First of all is this sort of narrative that they are chokers. Now, obviously, they've overcome that once already. They have won a tournament, and they are, I think, inarguably the most consistent team, at least in the VCT era, in terms of consistently making deep runs at tournaments. And they are, of course, going up against Leviatan, who is a totally inexperienced team. I mean, this team was not even the full five in kickoff. Like, they've only played one stage together before this tournament. And so it's like the most experienced, the most internationally renowned team against probably the least experienced team possible, other than maybe King. And that dynamic in and of itself creates a very interesting matchup going into the grand final. PaperX has the double map ban, which means that they get to force Leviatan to play Breeze, a map that they have not won and can't seem to figure out. And you get a very, very cool dynamic between these two teams where one team is known for sort of being carefree and whimsical in how they play the game. I'm talking about PaperX. That's sort of been their superpower, is that they are able to overwhelm teams by just creating chaos and playing like they don't care. And then you have this young team that is maybe too inexperienced to care. And sometimes when you're inexperienced, it can make you crumble under the spotlight. But I think in this grand final, we really saw Leviatan rising to the occasion and not feeling the pressure because they don't even know how big the moment is. They don't really have the weight of expectation upon them because they've never really been here before. They don't know what it feels like to lose in a big game. And I think that dynamic was one of the most interesting things to watch because PaperX comes out and absolutely smashes them on Fracture. And I think probably against any other team at this tournament, losing in that fashion would have led to probably complete collapse and PaperX 3-0ing them in totally dominant fashion for their second title as a team internationally. But with LEV, it felt like it didn't really matter to them. Like they lost Fracture. It's a map that they're decent on, but PaperX has historically been very strong, and they really just kind of snowballed Fracture in a big way. And then we go on to the map of Split, which is, again, a great map for PaperX with Breeze over the horizon, a map that Leviatan basically can't win on. And I'm just sitting there thinking, like, this series is over. Like, there is no way that Leviatan is going to win this now with PaperX having so much momentum. And what we end up watching on Split is a very, very interesting game where it's super back and forth in the first half, and then we go into the second half of play and Lev just wins 7 rounds in a row and dominates PaperX. And I think that second half on Split was really kind of setting the tone, and even before that was really setting the tone from Lev that they were not going to go down without a fight, and that they were able to shake off that dominant loss from map number 1. Because what you saw is that they were just continuing to play their game. And I think that part of their superpower, in addition to being, sort of like this young carefree team, is they are just playing stuff that they are comfortable on. And obviously Paper X was sort of the anti-meta team in stage one, where they had already shifted to heavy jet and raise. And that was sort of a dynamic that we were watching during this tournament. Is obviously we had Neon meta for stage one. Everybody played Neon on pretty much every map, except for Paper X, who were playing a bit more jet, leaning away from the Neon to some extent because it was more comfortable for them. And then you have LEV, who played Neon on every map in stage one, basically. And they came in and they played Neon on basically every map in this event as well. Because, I mean, frankly, they didn't have any time, right? America's ended later than every other stage one. And then they went immediately into the EWC qualifiers. And they played not as many games as possible, but they played a lot. And then I think they flew to London one day after they played EWC, and then immediately went into group stages. And so they basically had zero time to change anything. So they were just, playing the thing that they had been repping for the entire stage. And I actually think that that was a good thing for them. And there's so much like internal dynamic stuff that I don't know, but I can, maybe hypothesize a little bit as somebody who's been on a team before, where if you're a team that is young, it definitely benefits you to play stuff that you are comfortable on. And also, it really helps to have a lot of reps. And so they basically just were able to, get rep after rep after rep in stage one, go at EWC, get some more reps, and then come directly into this and get some more reps. And for some teams, that might be kind of an exhausting process. Like if you're, a G2 or, some of these other teams that have, been to a bunch of internationals, that might be too much. And I think we saw something kind of like that coming out of NRG. They were complaining about being a little bit burned out and not having enough time, not getting enough rest. But this is a team that, has been competing at a super high level for a while. They won champions, and obviously Ethan has been playing at a super high level in both Counter-Strike and Valorant for a long time. And so I think the grind kind of gets to players that have been there and done that before. But when you're so young and so new, like the grind doesn't really feel like a grind because it's all interesting. It's all exciting. It's like the first time you're getting to travel overseas with your boys. And so you don't really feel that same level of like day in and day out work because it isn't really work. It's like an adventure. And I think that sort of sense of adventure really came through in how LEV was playing and how they handled adversity at this tournament. Because, I mean, the run wasn't flawless. They lost maps. They even lost series. But what they never really lost was their sort of sense of whimsy and just identity on stage. Like, when they would be down, they might be a little bit more quiet, but it would only take one round for all of a sudden Sato was popping up and jumping on stage and hyping up the crowd and hyping up his teammates. And you saw that kind of energy from everybody. And the amount of like poise and maturity that we saw from them was really kind of like scaffolded within this sort of like young sense of wonder that allowed them to just like enjoy the moment all the time, no matter what was happening. And so I think that is sort of what allowed LEV to come back from getting rolled on Fracture to fight back on Split. And then they went into Breeze and they're like, well, we're 0-6 on this event, on this map since the roster formed. So what's another loss, right? And they actually played pretty close with Paper X on Breeze. They had, an opportunity to even win that map. And then they go into Ascent, which is one of their favorite maps. And they start to kind of take control of the series, I think. They had a few sort of hiccup moments, but I also think that they kind of outplayed Paper X, and I think the thread of Paper X started to fray at this point. For me, Paper X is a team that is almost entirely based on momentum, and if they have no momentum, then they really start to kind of like implode to some extent, because so much of their playstyle is like, I'm confident enough to walk through this smoke and kill 3 people, or I'm confident enough to take this crazy timing and it's going to disrupt what's happening for the enemy team, which is going to allow my teammate to also create like a crazy opportunity, crazy timing. And it really just kind of snowballs like that. And so when PaperX is in control of maps, they look like the best team in the world, and it's not even close. But when other teams are able to kind of like punch them back and shut down that momentum and steal it back, I do think that PaperX has always historically struggled a little bit with regaining that. But they're also quite good at regaining that momentum because they are so dangerous on these eco rounds. And we even had opportunities for them to, again, run away with the series by stealing some eco rounds. I was watching the Ascent game, and I think PaperX won 2 ecos maybe. And I was like, well, this is over. Like, almost no team can get ecoed by PaperX, especially twice, and win a map against them. But Lev were able to, because again, I really just don't think that these moments of momentum really registered for them, because they're just playing their game. They're just doing their thing. They're just enjoying the moment. And also, I think another thing that Lev had that a lot of other teams don't have is there are no weak links in terms of firepower, which is another thing that PaperX tends to sort of exploit against a lot of teams, where it does not matter who's alive. That person can get 3 or 4 kills and win the round. And PaperX has that, and Lev has that, and honestly, Foot kind of had that as well at this tournament. Not very many other teams have that. EDG is maybe another one. And I think that also is maybe potentially where some of this sort of like macro micro discussion is coming in, and I'll touch on that a little bit more later. But I want to talk a little bit more about the rest of the playoffs, just to kind of like summarize some of the things that I noticed. Overall, I think the grand final was just a really nice display of both teams. PaperX's ability to run away with maps and really snowball and play with momentum, and then also sort of their downfall and their pitfalls of when they lose that sort of flow state where they're just doing everything and it's all working, what it can look like when it stops working. And especially on Lotus, we saw this a lot, where like the pressure was definitely getting to PaperX. You could see it, and they talked about it in the press conference afterwards, where like the moment was definitely getting to them, probably because they have lost quite a few grand finals, and that's in the back of their mind. And maybe Envy is like, oh, I gotta win this, I gotta become a champion like the rest of my teammates. And they won Toronto, and they're feeling like, okay, we are the favorites, we got to win this one, we have the double map ban. And so on Lotus, we saw a bunch of moments where like the coordination was really kind of falling apart. Specifically, there was a 1v2 from Blows where Envy gets a kill. He's going to wrap around to meet up with his teammate, I think Forsaken, who's on the flank. And just kind of apropos of nothing, he pops his Seekers, which would have allowed them to probably, retake together. You just pop the Seekers, both run in, follow the cabbage. But he pops it because he's afraid that maybe he's being walked on. And so he's feeling the pressure of not losing this round that they shouldn't lose. And he wastes this really important piece of utility, which allows Blows to break the Seeker, reposition, and then Envy waits for Forsaken to get close, and then he just swings without actually coordinating the swing with Forsaken. So Envy goes wide, Forsaken is jiggling, the spacing is super off. It looks really, really, really bad, but it's obviously just a moment where they are not talking well enough. They're not communicating, hey, wait for me. Okay, 3, 2, 1, swing. Because like if they're on the same page, they win that round like 99% of the time. But the communication was breaking down for them, and that happened quite a bit on Lotus. And Lev's ability to just like never allow PaperX to kind of like regain their footing at any point. There's another just unbelievable round where I think it was like a 5-on-5 at C Mound. PaperX is on an eco round, and Lev is on a full buy. And Lev shows C. They trigger this trap from PaperX. All 5 PaperX players are there. They're kind of going 1 for 1. Like, Lev drops a gun. it looks like one of the situations where, oh, PaperX is going to win an eco. You know, if Lev goes back to A, PaperX is going to pick up these guns and they're going to, you know, flank them. And it's going to be one of these PaperX rounds where they can just kind of like all of a sudden start the snowball again. But Lev just says, no, we're not giving you these guns. We know that your win condition is basically picking up these guns and having some chaotic round. And so they literally just sit there. And it goes from a 4v4 to a 3-on-3. And there's two guns just sitting there, and Lev is just sitting there outside of Mound, and PaperX is just sitting there in Mound, and you can just see like, well, it's, you know, it's PaperX. They're gonna swing, and sure enough, they do swing. Eventually, they just get outweighted basically by Lev, and they lose the fight, and Lev just goes C and protects their guns and wins the round. And that sort of maturity and that understanding of like who they're playing against was really, really present for Lev. Like they understood that PaperX is going to make these plays. They are going to fight you. And if you have numbers, you have to keep those numbers. You have to fight together. You can't get caught being, you know, stragglers. You can't give PaperX these free kills. You can't give PaperX these free weapons. And so I was just really, really impressed with the discipline and the maturity that Lev showed while also still maintaining this carefree attitude for the entire finals. And so it was a really remarkable series for me, just to see a team that is so inexperienced overcome a really monumental task of beating PaperX with so much of an advantage in terms of the map pool. Going back a little bit further, I think Lev basically, you know, their lower bracket run was super impressive. I think they had a fairly easy win over Gilai, a team that kind of like got slapped down by EDG in the upper finals in a regional match, maybe lost a little bit of confidence. And then the Vitality versus Lev game was really just kind of another one where Vitality was a team that was very up and down this tournament. A lot of these teams were very up and down in terms of like one game they would show up, one map they would show up, another map they would kind of be super rough in terms of their team play, except for Lev basically. And Lev were able to just keep that consistency going. And again, it kind of comes back to this idea of like, well, they have just been playing and playing and playing and playing and playing. And so that, of course, they're consistent. You know, they didn't change any of their comps, basically. They're just playing the same stuff while everybody else is shifting the meta and trying to come up with a new thing that's going to work. And Lev is just like, we're just going to be us, and we're going to ride that all the way to a title. I also just want to, you know, briefly talk about China, where they, you know, I in my initial prediction, I guess I'll bring up my initial prediction of the event. I had EDG in the top 4. A lot of people were telling me I was dumb for that. Obviously underrated Gilai a little bit, but I definitely thought this was an event where China could do some damage. And I think that they, you know, proved that they do have the ability to play at this high level. If the meta suits them. I think there's still definitely some structural issues with some of these Chinese teams. And EDG is a team that is extremely reliant on their, you know, kind of hero plays. They're almost like PaperX in the same vein of like, if every single timing is working for EDG, they feel like the best team in the world. But when those timings are off, or when their coordination is not, you know, super tight, they can look like they have no idea what they're doing. And so it was cool to see, you know, the Chinese teams have a decent showing. Of course, heading into Champions in Shanghai is going to be, it's going to be really important, I think, for the region to have some good showing at Champions. And so getting a little bit of, you know, a deeper run here is maybe leading some good momentum for them. Meanwhile, EMEA comes in as a team that a lot of people are sort of underrating, I think. You know, I obviously had Vitality and Heretics in my top echelon of teams. Heretics super wrong about, Vitality somewhat right about, and then Foot ended up being sort of like the dark horse of the tournament. And it does beg the question, like, where does that leave EMEA? They had 3 teams in playoffs and nobody made it higher than 4th. But Honestly, I think it's fine. I think that EMEA is in a decent spot. I think it shows that they are a competitive region, but maybe are still sort of at that level where like they're a consistent contender region, but sometimes the ceiling is a little bit lower than some of these other regions. I don't necessarily know why that is. For me, maybe Vitality has some of the higher ceiling out of the EMEA teams, and we'll kind of have to see what Fnatic looks like in stage two. But Foot was maybe the more dangerous team out of all of these, and it was again kind of like the young firepower, really kind of exerting their will on the server a lot of the time that allowed them to have that impact. Um, I also do think that the meta is kind of in a weird place for EMEA because, and this is one of the reasons why I thought China was going to be good, is that it is again sort of like a simplified version of the game where because the initiator cooldown cycle is so long, you have a lot of teams just going into double duelist, not really playing too much sentinel, um, just picking a site and hitting the site, or showing some aggression, walking the other side of the map and hitting the other site. And that style of play is not really in the same vein as how EMEA has historically played. Because if you kind of think about how the game works, like each region tends to have its own little internal meta. And then you go to an international, and then everybody kind of brings what they have trained and they compare internationally. But because of this double duelist shift, I think a lot of teams just kind of looked at PaperX and were like, well, this is the best double duelist team of all time. Let's all just try to implement PaperX into our systems. And so we saw, teams like BBL who did play very aggressively have a lot of success. And at this event, we saw Foot, double duelist everywhere. Vitality played a lot of double duelist. Heretics played a lot of double duelist. And G2 played a lot of, or they started playing a bunch of double duelist, and then they kind of shifted away to maybe like the anti double duelist. But I mean, double duelist did reign supreme at the end of the day. I think there's no denying that. But I also do think that the teams that were able to, it's gonna sound really dumb, but like live their truth again, just sort of like live their identity. For me, I guess the big thing for me is I don't really feel like EMEA is a double duelist region that much, and some of these teams that are playing double duelist are maybe better suited to playing something other than double duelist because they don't really have the correct mentality to play double duelist correctly. Because the thing is with double duelist is that you need to have a very short memory. Like you need to run into a stack and get obliterated 2 or 3 times in a row and still be willing to do that a third or fourth or fifth time. Because sometimes you have to just be explosive. You have to just run it down. You have to play aggressively because that's what your comp does. That's what it's best at. And so I think some of these teams that maybe picked up the double duelist because they're like, oh, well, we're in the double duelist meta. Let's just look at PaperX and copy them, or let's look at whoever and copy them. They didn't really understand what it means to be a double duelist team. And so you'd see a team like Heretics that maybe they play aggressively, it's not working, teams are countering, and then they start to play passively and they start to, play like they're playing a double initiator, a double sentinel, a double controller comp, but they have double duelist comps. And that doesn't work. Like you have to lean into what your comp is good at. Otherwise, you should just be playing a different comp. And so that was definitely something that we saw from the likes of G2 and Heretics, and even Vitality and a lot of these teams when they would in EDG when they would start to lose rounds, you would see them playing more and more passively and like trying to go back to what maybe they know of like, okay, well, playing aggressively is not working. We can't just run out on defense, or we're running into a brick wall on attack. Let's slow things down. Let's try and feel out the round. And then you're playing like these defaulty rounds where you're trying to trade utility, you're trying to trade informational resources and smokes, but you're playing a comp that has none of that because you're playing double duelist comp. And so you have to then integrate this other layer like Foot and Lev did really well, which is that sometimes you just got to walk around the map and you got to just like contact into stuff and rely on your aim and make things uncomfortable for the other team because they don't have utility either, right? A lot of these matchups are double duelist versus double duelist, or even if they're not, we still have to contend with like the lower or the higher cooldown on initiator and sentinel utility. And so if the dart gets used, the recon dart gets used, or the eye gets used, or the fade prowlers get used up, they don't have any utility either. And so it actually is very good to create pressure, go quiet, allow them to waste all of their recon utility, and then just walk into space. But you got to be very confident to walk into space because you have to just trust that, okay, if there is somebody holding this angle, we will trade them. Or if there is an operator, we will be able to trade them out. And that takes a lot of confidence. It takes a lot of trust in your system. And it takes a good understanding of like, okay, well, we are a double duelist team, which allows us to be explosive at any time, but we need to be selectively explosive, create opportunities, and then we have to be comfortable going quiet and taking the space and getting to a point where we can explode again. And then mixing that up with fast rounds and mixing the fast and the slow together. And so all of that to say basically that I really do think that Lev played a very, very, very good double duelist like meta read. And I keep coming back to Foot as well because I think they had sort of a similar vein. And this is something that PaperX has always done really well, which is that they understand like how to mix things up and how to change tempos. And so that part of like the macro and the strategy game plan is alive and well in Valorant. And I think it's something that you see in a lot of the top teams at this event. Okay, so with that being said, are PaperX chokers? The short answer is, I mean, there's always some elements of choking when you lose, I think, when you have double map ban and you have experience advantage. But at the same time, the amount of hate that I've been seeing PaperX get is super unwarranted. It's crazy to me that you have a team that is just consistently qualifying, consistently making playoffs, consistently having deep runs, consistently making finals, has won in the past. And just because they don't win every tournament, people are like, this team has problems. And I mean, the reality is like every team has problems. But if your biggest problem is, oh, we're getting second instead of winning every tournament, it's still a pretty good problem to have, honestly. I think basically every single organization in the entire world would love to be in PaperX's spot, which is making it to finals and then losing. Like every org would love that. You know, there was some discussion about PaperX. Are they the best team ever? You know, versus Fnatic, who's I think probably still holding that title. And the answer is like, I think it's really close. Like, even though they lost this, you could still potentially put PaperX at the top. You know, I think both of these teams, and maybe the third. I saw another interesting question on Reddit the other day, which was like, who's the third best team of the franchise era? Because the top two would be Fnatic and PaperX. And the third, I think there was a discussion between, is it Energy because they have a champions? Is it you know, Loud because they have a champions? Is it Sentinels because they have 2 Masters wins? It's tough. It's kind of hard to think about because if either Fnatic or PaperX had won champions, it would be no brainer that they are number one. But neither of them have won champions, and yet they're probably still number 1 and 2 because of how consistently they have been in spots to win tournaments. And so we're still at a place in Valorant right now where we don't really have that like defining team, you know? Like PaperX is kind of that team, but also it could be Fnatic, but also it kind of could be Sentinels. And so we don't really have that one team that's sort of like really established themselves as clearly the best team ever. And it's a very weird esport in that regard. Where you can't really just point to a team and be like, this is the team that really kind of defines the game. And also PaperX and Fnatic are so different too. And I think part of the thing about PaperX and sort of like their choking narrative is just that the way that they play the game is inherently high variance. And so the fact that they've been as consistent as they have been in terms of, you know, having these deep runs and having this international presence, despite the fact that they play in a way that is like really, really risky at all times, pretty much, is extremely impressive. And so you have to kind of give it to the players. You have to give it to the coaching staff. Like, in spite of the fact that they play in a way that should not be consistent, they're still consistent. And they have really kind of defined an era of the game, in my opinion, because so many teams, when you think of like, okay, we need to play faster, we need to play more aggressively, we need to like create more chaos because that's kind of what the game allows you to do. Everybody just looks to PaperX as the shining example of what you should do in the game, and yet nobody can pull off what they do. And you know, we saw even like G2 was like, well, surely the way that we get over our hump of not being able to win internationals is to, you know, copy PaperX. And it, you know, didn't really work for them either. So long story short, I mean, sure, PaperX kind of choked, and they have choked in the past, but also they're probably the best team ever. And so like, you know, you can't win them all. I'm sure that they'll make, I mean, they guaranteed themselves champs. They'll get another run back at it. Will they win champions? I don't know. They're probably just going to be by default one of the teams that's expected to win champions. It's a tough place to be. You know, if your only expectation is first or a failure, then it's going to be really, really hard to always be successful. So I do think that there is one other thing. I brought this up maybe in my first. No, it wasn't even it wasn't even a podcast. It was like when I was previewing this season. One thing I did bring up was like the shift from Patmen to Envy for me was maybe an upgrade on firepower, but I was a little bit concerned that Envy is not a player who is as charismatic and carefree as Patmen is. And so I don't want to put this loss on Envy by any means, but I do think there is something there where PaperX has been, you know, consistently kind of like butting their head against this wall of winning. They bring in a player who is like all in on their whimsical style. They win a tournament. They replace that player with another player who is like kind of like business as usual, shoot, kind of like low key, introverted. And then they are back to not winning when they have this advantage. And then you kind of see what Patmen has brought to GE with his sort of like his high energy and his great comms and his ability to kind of like make these hero plays. And I just kind of have to wonder, it's like, if they had Patmen in this series, would they have won? Maybe. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. Okay. Let's talk about some players specifically. Let's talk about Neon. Not the agent. Let's talk about Neon the player. Let's talk about Lev. Neon was the MVP of the tournament. And, you know, honestly, super well deserved. You can see the top players here. We've got Envy, we've got Kiko, we've got Neon. Lev played the most rounds, obviously, by a huge margin, like unbelievably huge margin compared to everybody else. They played so many games, and Neon just maintained one of the best KDs, you know, some of the best damage per round, some of the best first kills per round, one of the best first kill to first death ratios per round, one of the best ratings. I mean, this kid is insane, and yet I was a little bit on the fence as to whether he was going to be the MVP, just because his teammate Blows is almost as good in terms of his impact. This is my rookie of the year leaderboard, by the way, on One Trick GG, which is calculates sort of like player impact on their teams and their win rate and stuff like that. And Neon, since qualifying for this leaderboard by having enough maps played, has been number one pretty much consistently. But Blows has been right there in the top 3 as well. And Blows really stepped up in this grand final for PaperX, or for Lev rather. Just super consistent, really seemingly unbothered by the moment and the pressure, really anchoring super well on split and just providing really consistent value, winning clutches. And so while Neon did win the MVP, I almost feel like it was kind of like a joint MVP, because I mean, Sato's impact, his selflessness, his energy on stage, King's leadership, you know, Spike's unbelievable Neon play in a meta that is supposedly sort of like anti-Neon now on a nerfed agent. Like, the whole team deserves the MVP as far as I'm concerned. They all had incredible moments, but I do want to just talk about Neon, because I do think this is a player who probably will be the best player in the world in the next year or so. I just think that what I've watched from him, both in terms of his decision making, in terms of his mechanical skill, I mean, he's probably like the fastest killer I have seen in a long time. And the fact that he is doing just ridiculous things on Jet, Chamber, and Smokes, and seems to have, you know, the flexibility, the selflessness to do whatever his team needs. Apparently he's making a lot of calls on defense when he has the operator, and you could see him before the finals, you know, going to his teammates and like hyping them up. And he just turned 18. It's like hard to describe how impressive he has been over, you know, the last 2 months, because that's been his pro career essentially, is like 2 months, and he has looked like he might end up as the best player of this year. And if that's the case, I mean, like, he is the next Aspas. This is the player that will define the game going forward, in my opinion, based on how I've seen him play and just like how good he is and how mature he seems to be for his age. And you know, I do think that this Lev team now is positioned to potentially be like the first. I know this is going to sound crazy after talking about like how inconsistent Valorant is, but this Lev team I think is positioned to be the first Dynasty team. Because they're also young. Even King is like what, 23, 24. But everybody else is 18 or 19. They all really like each other. We'll have to see how they handle another meta shift. You know, I'm sure there's going to be quite a bit of buffs and nerfs to agents. I'm sure Phoenix will get deleted. I'm sure maybe they'll even nerf Neon again. Who knows? And then what do they do? But the camaraderie and just sort of like the way that they sort of handled everything makes me pretty confident that this team is going to go a long way together. And I mean, Neon is going to be at the spearhead of that, because the impact that he has and just the consistency that he has is truly remarkable for somebody that has only been playing in tier 1 for, you know, a couple of months. He really has just kind of joined the scene and just immediately taken over in a way that we have not seen from a, you know, upcoming player in a long time. I put on Twitter, like, I think for me, we haven't seen this type of impact from a tier 2 prospect since Something joined PaperX, where he was just immediately elevated the team to like a whole nother level, and has obviously kind of like ushered PaperX into the era that they're in now, where they're consistently making these finals and sometimes winning them. And so I really do think that he is the future of this game. And that's a lot of pressure to put on a young player, but I mean, genuinely, it's been a long time since I've seen a player who I'm just like, this guy is it. Like, he has everything that you need to be the best player in the world for a long period of time. Um, so yeah, I mean that's my take. That might be a little bit of a hot take. He is the next Aspas. He is the future of the game. But I think it's kind of validated by what we've watched so far. Him winning the MVP, obviously. Um, okay, I've been going for a while. I got to give a shout out to the sponsor of this video. Sony INZONE is the gaming peripheral sort of wing of Sony's um, computer peripherals department, and they sent me a bunch of their products, as far as like they sent me a mouse pad, a mouse, these headphones, the H92s, and I have been just consistently impressed with the quality of their peripherals and the build quality. And as somebody who's not like a super gear nerd, I just want stuff that works, that's comfortable, that's easy to use. You plug and play. It's not too complicated. And everything that Sony sent me fits that bill in a big way. As somebody who sits on my computer and uses my peripherals constantly, having a light mouse that has no problems, has really good polling and tracking, it feels at least as good as some of the big competitors. Having a headphone that gives me good sound quality and is super light. Like some headsets in the past, when I sit here for 4 or 5 hours playing the game or watching games, I get like a dent in my head and it hurts. But I watched, all the finals. I watched all the playoffs with these, and at no point did I get a headache, which is awesome. These headphones are super, super nice. They're wireless. They can, of course, be wired as well. They've got a removable mic that you can plug in. Really good sound quality as well. And like I said, just the INZONE brand, there's a lot of gaming brands out there, and a lot of them kind of go for like the gamer aesthetic, where it's like flames or some crazy colors or RGB everywhere. But Sony, they've been doing high quality, sleek, nice, simple, but really, really high quality products for a long time. And you feel that with all the INZONE products as well. And so I'm very happy with the products that they've sent me, and I highly recommend them if you're looking for a replacement mouse pad, mouse, headphone, keyboard, all that stuff. They have it for you. It's developed in partnership with Fnatic to kind of like get a gamer's perspective, and I think they did a really good job with it. Big fan, and big shout out to Sony for sponsoring this podcast and this channel. Okay, let's talk a little bit more about just some agent stuff, because I think there's some really interesting threads to pull on here as well. We have some agent data from Masters London. Omen back to being the king of the game, the most picked agent, 64% approximately. Jett, 45% approximately. I mean, we're back in the beta, baby. We're back in the beta. This huge migration from Neon over to Jett was fairly predictable. I think a lot of pros did not enjoy playing Neon, and they much rather would be playing an agent that gives them the freedom to, play fairly selfishly, abuse angles, abuse the operator, play with all sorts of freedom. And so we saw Jett really just kind of taking over the meta in a big way. And yet, it was the team that stuck with the Neon the most that had the most success. And so we really do kind of have to talk about the community's overreaction to things in this game. Like, okay, Yoru got nerfed. Yes. He definitely is worse than he was. Yes. He's still playable, for sure. But then extend that out to Neon, where it's like, okay, Neon has some really unique mechanics, right? She has the ability to rotate faster than any other character in the game that doesn't have a teleport. She is a self-sufficient duelist that can smoke for herself, can insta-cast a stun to bail herself out of trouble or stop a rush, and then has this ability to go from a running check to all of a sudden a crouched slide without losing momentum and getting, you know, basically perfect accuracy. She really changes how the game plays. And I think that this is something that is maybe underappreciated a little bit, where like sometimes these numbers get adjusted a bit and people are like, oh, well, clearly that's worse, right? Like there's no way that's playable anymore. And yet all we've really done is we've taken an agent who had some pretty broken and arguably not fun mechanics, and we've made them a little bit less bullshit to deal with, but we haven't actually changed the core identity of that agent, which is that Neon is still one of the highest impact agents in the game in terms of her ability to really kind of focus enemy attention to open up things for the rest of the team. And I think the other thing that's also kind of interesting is I feel like the return to Jet, it was almost one of those, like, these pro players have been forced to get out of their comfort zone a bit, where like the game came out, everybody's playing Jet and Raze. Those are the only two agents that you can play. Some people can't even play Raze because she's too difficult. Everybody just plays Jet. And then slowly over time, it got to the point where Jet gets nerfed a few times. All the other duelists are getting buffed. It kind of just becomes undeniable. Oh, you can't play Jet on Haven anymore because Neon is just way too good. Oh, you can't play Jet on, you know, Pearl because being able to teleport from one side of the map to the other side of the map instantaneously is just way too strong. And so eventually teams were kind of forced, and these players were kind of forced to adopt, you know, these agents that are just clearly better at certain things that Jet can do. But as soon as there's an excuse to go back to comfort, it's just like, oh, let me just play Jet. And I feel like we saw that at this tournament. And it's not that Jet is bad, but I definitely think it's one of those things where you have to be very selective, you know? And I think that is something that Lev did really well, where like if you look at Neon's win rate on every map, like this is basically all Lev, right? Split, good. Pearl, good. Haven, good. Breeze, pretty good. Lotus, not very good. You know who didn't play Neon on Lotus? Lev. They played Jet, Raze. You know, Fracture, okay. Ascent, okay. I mean, this agent is really good at certain things, and you should probably be playing her on maps that allow you to abuse those things, and then maybe not playing her on maps where those things are not as good. The Ascent one is kind of interesting. Like, obviously, Lev has a pretty good Ascent, so the 41.9% win rate on Ascent is, you know, maybe a little misleading. All these sample sizes are pretty small, I will also say, but like the maps where Lev decided not to play Neon, were conscious choices, because obviously they could just put spikes in on Neon every map if they wanted to. And the maps where they play Jet, it's like a conscious choice. The maps where they play Raze, it's a conscious choice. Phoenix, same type of thing. And we saw this also really kind of coming out with Phoenix, where everybody was like, oh my god, Phoenix has like a 60% win rate in stage 1. We all must play Phoenix now. And then you look at the comparison of everybody else playing Phoenix to Lev. I mean, 51% win rate non-mirror at this event. If you remove Lev from the sample size, it's like 40%. Like, Phoenix was terrible for everybody except for Lev, pretty much. And so I think it really does kind of come back to the way that the community, not even like the community, but the way that Valorant is being sort of navigated by people is still kind of weird to me. But it happens, I think, in all of these hero-based games where like a team shows you that something is good. Everybody's like, oh, that's good. Let's go do that. and then there's no understanding of why it's good, or the understanding of why it's good is not complete. And so when you step up to the next level of competition and you're trying to do the stuff that you think is good, but you don't really understand why it's good, then the problems can arise. You don't necessarily have the tools to fix it. And so I think this is something that we're kind of seeing with the Phoenix potentially. And most people's solution to maybe not having success, or not liking having to like change how they think about the game, is just to go back to comfort. And so we saw a lot of teams, like I said, going to the Jet and going to the Rays. And I was even thinking that like this is probably what's going to happen. It's probably going to make teams like Vitality, who have a really good Jet Rays player, going to make teams like EDG, who have a good Jet Rays player, going to make teams like PaperX, who have good Jet Rays players, have success. But the meta is going to keep moving. You know, the meta is going to keep moving. And I think that it's really important to remember that basically every tournament has been won by a team that has religiously stuck to their identity. Whether it's Nongshim being the Neon dive team, whether it's LEV being the Phoenix Neon team with the op pressure, whether it's PaperX being PaperX at Toronto, whether it's Energy being like the initiator macro team at Champions 2025, whether it's Fnatic being the, you know, the Viper, the Cypher Viper team with all of the macro and slow rounds. It's always the teams that have their own identity, that are not necessarily copying what other teams are doing, that are winning these tournaments. And so if there is one thing you should be doing as a team, it is to figure out who you are, what you are best at, and then lean into that and stop trying to copy what other people are doing. And obviously there is some like borrowing and stealing of strats. And, you know, if you have a problem map, sure, look outside of your own, of yourself if you can't figure it out. But I feel like there's so much just like Neon's nerfed, okay, drop it. Yours nerfed, okay, drop it. This team's doing that, okay, let's all copy that. It's like way too hive mindy of how we're navigating this space, because I really do think that there was a ton of room still, even in the current state of the agent balance, for people to play stuff like a double Sentinel. I mean, we saw a triple Sentinel comp on Lotus. Obviously, it lost a bunch at this event, but there were definitely some moments where it was pretty good. You know, there was teams that were not playing double duelist that had some pretty good moments at this event. In stage one, there was plenty of teams that were not playing double duelist that did pretty well. Double duelist is still really good, but certain double duelist is good when certain teams play it, and not so good when other teams play it. And there's all this focus on like, yeah, you just have to shoot. But also, I just think that a lot of that, yeah, you just have to shoot, comes from when you are in your comfort zone. And really understanding and getting tons and tons and tons of reps on the stuff that you are good at as a team, that allow you to deal with the problems that arise and the adaptations that you have to make throughout the course of the game. Anyway, I'm really curious to see what the new patch is going to hold. Obviously, we're going to get some map changes as well, and that's going to lead me right into the next segment of this, which is talking about Summit, the new map that was teased. The show match was okay. I kind of tuned out a little bit. For me, I just want to get in the map and play it. I don't have early access, so I have to wait until it gets released to actually run around and try things out. But the first things that I will say is that the shape of this map, it looks a little bit like a couple of other maps that we have. This obviously looks kind of like Corrode. Some of this stuff kind of looks like Corrode. You know, is it actually Corrode? I don't think so. This kind of looks like Sunset a little bit. Some of this kind of looks like Pearl to me. There's all sorts of like interesting sort of unique parallels that you can draw, and this is something that I'm going to do in the future when I do have access to the map. Is I will probably go through the process of kind of like coming up with how I think this map should be played and what comp should be played. I'll probably even do it live on my Elevated Coach channel. This is what I did with Corrode when it came out, is I looked for similarities in sort of like play patterns, and then I made some comps based off of stuff that I think was good on those other maps, and it translated pretty well on Corrode. So I'll probably do the same thing on Summit. My initial take on this is like the A side of the map. A lot of this seems, I'll give you the high level take on this map. So actually, let me put on spawn barriers as well, because that's kind of helpful. There we go. Okay, so the middle of the map is kind of complicated. Getting mid control doesn't necessarily mean that you actually have gotten to the site. I think this is sort of like a little bit of maybe like a Pearl conundrum, where if you can get into the middle of the map, that's great, but does it actually get you to the site? And the answer is no, because if you have to go from middle control into A, you still have to go through this very small choke point into a, you know, kind of dangerous crossfire. And then you have to take more space that can then turn into, you know, another like dangerous crossfire that then eventually gets you access to the site. And so getting mid control and then trying to go A is not very easy. Getting mid control and then trying to go B is a very similar exercise. Okay, you have mid control. Cool, right? Maybe even you have this. Now you have to go into another set of very dangerous corridors, into another set of sort of intermediate space to finally get onto the site. It is not easy to get from mid to the sites, is like the first thing that I will notice. And this is something that you see on a map like Corrode, on a map like Pearl, to a lesser extent, you know, some of the maps like Ascent, but like realistically, winning mid does not actually win you the site. And so that is something that teams are really gonna have to figure out. And I think probably we're gonna see a lot of teams be like, oh, well, we got to get mid because it allows us to like do all these splits and stuff like that. But I think teams are gonna quickly find that this is a lot more like getting into Pearl Street through Double Door, where, okay, now I'm in Street, I'm in the middle of the map, but now I have to fight through the smallest choke point in the game into a really, really bad crossfire to actually get onto the site. And I'll just kind of like switch to Pearl real quick to show what I mean. Okay, if you get here, that's fine, but now you have to go through this terrible choke point that like basically any agent in the game can hold with one piece of utility to actually plant on the B side of the map. So winning Street doesn't necessarily win you the round. And I think Summit is going to be kind of similar to that, where winning middle does not win you the round. So probably what's going to end up happening is we're going to see a lot more brawling for A and B main, because it's going to simplify the game, especially if we don't get some like big changes to initiator utility. We're still going to see a pretty straightforward attack. And so we're going to see a lot of like main fights. And that means, you know, we'll probably still see quite a bit of Neon. We'll probably still see quite a bit of Phoenix. Fade is going to be important. You know, the brawling agents that were already popular are going to be important. Waylay. I'm sure there's going to be some really interesting op lines and stuff like that. Again, I have not really had a chance to actually, you know, run around on the map, so I can't give you my best impressions of it, but I do think this map is interesting. I'm always interested for new content because it gives me more tools to be creative with in this game. And so we'll have to see. You know, I think some of the takes that I've seen are like, oh, this map is boring. Nobody's even played it yet. Obviously, there are some things that kind of look like other maps. And so some of the ideas kind of look like, okay, well, maybe it is kind of like Corrode. Maybe it is kind of like these other maps. We'll have to see. I don't think it's going to be solved right away. I think most teams probably still haven't even solved half the maps in the game that have been out for a while. And so there's always going to be stuff to work on. And, you know, so the idea of just kind of like instantly judging a map is always really dumb to me. I really don't don't think it's very healthy to just be like, this agent's terrible, this map is terrible, or this map is great, this agent's the best thing in the world. There's always nuance, and you got to kind of like respect that when you're talking about the new content in the game. Okay, I got another sort of controversial thing to talk about, which is Counter-Strike versus Valorant. So right here, we had esports charts talk about the viewership, the peak viewers. The Cologne Major, 2.7 million. Valorant, 1 million. Not even 1.1. I'm pretty sure this is lower than Santiago. I think Santiago was a 1.1, 1.2, but I don't remember exactly. Either way, it's like, you know, it's over 1 million. That's great. But it's not huge, and obviously is nowhere near this. Is Valorant dying? Is Valorant dying? So there's a few things that I want to just say about this. Number one is that, you know, Counter-Strike has a legacy. This was a return to Cologne. You have two extremely storied IGLs, one of which is retiring at the end of the year. Maybe both. Certainly one of them. I'm not a huge Counter-Strike buff. I don't know like all of the lore that's going on here, but I do know that there's some pretty serious storylines. And I went and watched a bit of the major. I went and watched sort of the preamble, like the pre-show. I watched some of the desk segments. I watched some of the maps, and then I watched some of the Valorant similar stuff, like the desk and the pre-show and the maps, obviously. And I have to say, there's kind of an interesting difference in like the weight of these events. The way that Counter-Strike is produced, it feels more serious. Interestingly, like they do all these sort of like bantery bits and the way that they talk about the game, and they have all these like skits and things like that. It's all kind of light, but when they actually get to the game and to the analysis, there's a weight, and they even have like serious music, and they even have like, it has a totally different vibe than Valorant, and watching it back to back makes that super clear. And that's not a problem, but I do think that it feels more important. It felt like there was more sort of like, just more weight to the event than watching Masters. But I also do think that the way that Masters is produced, it like, I think a lot of people like look at like the crowd sizes and stuff like that. If you look at the crowd camera shots from Cologne, like there's empty seats. It's not insanely loud all the time. They did have, you know, sort of like the Brazilian fans, you know, playing drums and instruments and stuff like that the whole time. But like, I think the London crowd was great too. And I think that Valorant has gotten better at like miking the crowd and showing the crowd and stuff like that. I don't really think that like the live crowd stuff is as big as people make it out to be. I think for me, the biggest thing that I would like to see Valorant do a bit more of is to do a little bit more analysis. And one thing that I will say is like, the Counter-Strike audience is older, and so maybe they can handle the deeper analysis, the more sort of, you know, former pros or coaches talking about like the ins and outs of the strategy, whereas Valorant is a bit of a younger audience, so maybe you want to be a little bit more snappy on the desk, a little bit less serious, a little bit more sort of you know, just like talk about sort of like the more surface layer stuff and then get into the game. But I do feel, and maybe this is just because I'm older, I want more depth. And I think that Valorant is maybe going a little bit away from depth this year in terms of their desk stuff. And I want, like, when I see Mini, for example, on a desk in Valorant, I get excited because he is a coach that has a lot of success and knows the game really well and is not afraid to like state his opinion on certain things. Whereas I feel like a lot of the other desk analysts tend to just kind of be more kind of like, let's just be positive about everybody, and here's like the overarching storylines, and here's sort of like generalizations about how people play. And it's not like they're bad, it's not like they do a poor job or don't know what they're talking about, but I like it when you have people who are willing to like take a stand and be like, this team is not playing a good comp and here's why. And I think that having that little element is a really big benefit to these analysis segments. And I think the other thing that is really important to talk about is just the nature of the games. So obviously Counter-Strike has been essentially the same game for like 20 plus years, right? You got the same guns, you have the same smokes, the same flashes. It's the same game. Same maps for 20 plus years. Valorant is always changing. It's always in flux. There's always new agents being added. And that extra layer of complexity is always going to put a ceiling on the game. I don't think we will ever be as popular as Counter-Strike, and I think it's kind of foolish to even pretend that that is something that's going to happen, because the game is going to be too complicated for people to pick up. And now I know League of Legends, biggest esport in the world, whatever. I don't think that when you apply the complicated nature of a bunch of agents and stuff that are constantly changing to a first person shooter game, it's the same as a MOBA. Like a MOBA is based in a strategy game, right? League of Legends came from Warcraft 3 custom games. So it's a strategy audience that's focused on nuance, that's focused on little micro stuff. First person shooters is a different audience, and it's an audience that is more attuned to like action and like the tension of the rounds. And that's also something I will say that I noticed from Counter-Strike, is that the tension in the rounds really builds, and kind of like there are these lulls where the casters aren't even saying things sometimes, and like there's just silence as they like watch somebody like walk up quietly into some stairwell, and then all of a sudden there's like a build and then a big action moment, and then it's back to being kind of like a slow build of tension again. Whereas I feel like Valorant, especially now in the current meta where everything is happening so fast and with all these abilities, the rounds just kind of start with like an explosion of action, and there's really not as much tension and release, I guess, is like the best way to put it. So while teams do slow things down sometimes in Valorant, I don't really feel like there's enough of that sort of like momentum roller coaster that you see in Counter-Strike rounds that maybe makes it a bit more of a engaging experience. And also, again, I just think that Valorant is like catered to a bit of a different audience that isn't necessarily as they don't care quite as much about like the overall round experience. They just want to see the flashy moments. I'm kind of talking out of my ass right now because I genuinely don't know. I'm also probably not like the target demographic for Valorant necessarily. The reason that I like the game is because of all the nuance, because of all the complexity, because I come from Dota 2, and I also appreciate the action of the shooting mechanics. But I think a lot of other people are approaching the game from different areas, and like the reason that a team like PaperX is so popular is, number one, because they've been consistent as a team. Number two, because they're different and interesting and flashy, and that's what people like. And the rest of the Valorant teams are not consistent, and they're not flashy in the same way, and they're not as unique. And so I think there's like, I don't know, there's just a lot of like, I think roadblocks to Valorant becoming more popular. And so I think it's super cope for people that are like, oh, Valorant is going to become CS once it's been around for as long as CS. I don't think that's going to happen, because I think there's just certain things that are going to hold Valorant back from a viewership perspective. But it's not necessarily a bad thing. Like Counter-Strike is its own thing. I think comparing Valorant to Counter-Strike, even though they are both act shooters, is not correct. But it's obviously nice. You want to have like a measuring stick. But I think both games can be healthy, and League of Legends can be healthy, and other esports can be healthy. But it's all about like how that own esport is being managed and handled. And so I'm very interested to see what happens next year with this new circuit system and all of the tournaments and all the cups. I think that it might get worse in terms of the viewership because it's going to be more fragmented. But then maybe over time it gets better, because I do think that the interesting runs will happen, and I do think that it's going to be a little bit more meritocratic next year and in the new system. And so we may actually have more dynastic teams being formed. This is something I've seen from people being like, "Oh, I hope this team sticks around," or "I hope this roster is the same next year." I have some bad news. No rosters are going to be the same next year, except for maybe like 2 or 3, and probably not even that. Probably 0 rosters will be the same next year, because you have a huge consolidation of talent. The number of teams that are partnered is going to be shrunk. Everybody's going to be fighting for those slots. Every team is going to be trying to build a dynasty. Like, it's going to be crazy next year, and that's going to be really exciting. But there's also going to be a lot of problems because of all the qualifiers and ping issues. Like, there's going to be so much chaos next year, but it's going to be fun. And I'm hoping that out of that rises some more long-standing teams that can then start to build some of the legacy that we see in Counter-Strike, because that is definitely something that Counter-Strike has over Valorant and will always have over Valorant, is just like the history. Kerrigan winning a major at Cologne after losing a major 10 years ago. Like, that's nuts. That's nuts that you have 10 years of history of this player. And obviously he's been around for even longer than that. And so, eventually we will get some of that. We will have King playing another Masters London 10 years from now. Hopefully. I hope that we get there. But I just kind of like the whole sort of like dick swinging contest of like which esport is watched more. It's always going to happen, but I just think it's really dumb. I think it's really dumb. And I think everybody on both sides being like, your esport sucks because it's not watched as much. It's just dumb. Like, everybody should be excited for their game that they like when it has a big event. And if other esports are having their other events, like, and they're doing whatever, like, just let them be, I do think it's pretty unfortunate that both happen at the same time. And so it is one of these situations where it's like they're both happening at the same time. They're kind of similar games. It's really easy to compare them. And this game is clearly doing way better. So maybe the scheduling does kind of fuck the Valorant viewership a little bit. But at the same time, does it really? Like, I don't even know how much crossover there actually is. I feel like a lot of the Counter-Strike viewers don't watch Valorant, unless maybe like Onapixel is watching the game. And so one thing I will say is, like, I really, 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 really hope Onapixel goes to China, because I think his energy that he brought to last champs was amazing. Like, I'm not somebody who really likes watching co-streams because I just want to focus on the game. But the way that he co-streams was really, really entertaining. It definitely did add stuff because of how, like, emotionally invested he was in the games. And so I think that is great. And I think that Valorant is in a pretty good space with all the co-streaming stuff. And I think that the game is in a pretty, as contrarian as this is to say, I think the game is in a pretty good spot. Maybe not ranked. I'm not a Radiant player, so I'm not living through hell in these Radiant queues with all the stream snipers and stuff. But like, I think the game is not bad. I think the agents are pretty cool. I think the maps are pretty cool. I think it's fun to watch. I think it's fun to play. And all this complaining about this and comparing it, it's just like it doesn't really do much for the game. And yeah, I mean, there's definitely stuff that Riot can do better for sure. I think some of the balance decisions that they made have been really poor. I think a lot of things that are being done as far as like uh homogenizing the game, like okay, this is one last thing that I will say. If any Riot dev is listening, I doubt you are, but if any Riot dev is listening, please stop nerfing things that people are mastering. Reward people for mastering things and don't immediately kill them when they are mastered. I think the Neon nerf was fine. I think it was handled well. I think it was good. But please do not look at whatever is like the most popular thing and just be like, that's got to go down. Like, for example, if they were to nerf Phoenix because Phoenix was picked a lot, I think that would be dumb. Because if you actually look at the stats at London, Phoenix was not good, except for one team that played Phoenix well. And so maybe some small adjustment to the ult, maybe. But I think if you just immediately nerf agents when they become popular, it's going to be really bad for the the long-term health of the game. Because it's gonna feel like every time you invest time in getting good at something, you then have to start over again. And that does not feel good. That doesn't feel good. Okay. Holy shit, this was a very rambly episode. I appreciate you guys for watching. I will be back next week with more roster news and other stuff. Yeah. Peace.